Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the School of HighTide podcast, supported by Nick Hern Books. My name's Naomi Soneye-Thomas, and I'm an emerging writer, producer, and host of this podcast, alongside Suba, the artistic director of HighTide, and Chris Sonnex, the associate artist at HighTide and also curator of this program. Our guest for today's episode is Juliet Gilkes Romero, an award-winning playwright whose work includes The Whip at the RSC, Uppercut at the Suffolk Playhouse, and Gates of Gaza at the Birmingham Rep. Juliet started her career as a successful journalist before she began playwriting, and finds inspiration from historical and political events that have often been forgotten but need to be told. So if you're an emerging writer and you want to shine a light on an issue, but you're not really sure how to do it without turning it into some kind of political essay, or maybe you have this fire in your belly and you found a story that you are desperate to tell but feel that maybe you've left it too late to start writing and that ship has sailed, I hope this episode will help you to realise that no matter who you are, how old you are, whatever your background is, you have every right to create theatre that has the power to shift people's views and to challenge the world that we are living in right now.
I'm Juliet Gilkes Romero. My background is journalism. I have a passion for news and current affairs and history. And given the events, particularly of the past year, I am very much left wondering whether democracy, or rather, whether history can strengthen democracy. And when I think about the subjects that I'm drawn to in general, they often look at the handprint of history on our present. And it's not that I don't write contemporary pieces, but I'm very interested in how we are informed by our past and how our failure to look back at times weakens our present.
It's really interesting. So say you were to find a historical event or topic and you think, oh, that could make an interesting play. Do you have a particular way of adapting it and to bringing those stories to life? Because I sometimes feel that when I find either maybe it's a statistic or a news story or something from current affairs, one of the challenges is how to make that into an engaging story that people really want to watch, rather than and what differentiates it from a news story, for example.
Yes, or a history lesson.
Yeah,
which would be most boring.
Yeah.
I think that was my journey as a writer. One of the first plays I wrote was a play called At the Gates of Gaza. I spent a lot of time in the Imperial War Museum reading the diaries of men who had fallen. This is during the First World War, and it was about the British West Indies Regiment, which fought in what was Palestine. And I obsessed with the research and the history and felt very overwhelmed by a responsibility to get it right. And of course, my first draft read like a panorama documentary, which is not dramatic. And my journey actually was to trust that I understood the research and to throw it all over my shoulder, because the most important function of storytelling is character. And I learnt that the characters' journeys are absolutely everything. And not to feel too beholden or by the history itself. When I started writing that particular play, I at first I didn't want to write anything that threatened the kind of integrity and the historical contribution of these men who risked and lost their lives in the trenches of the Middle East. But at the end of the day, your characters, it's about behaviour and how people respond to events. So you have to write from a point of view which can be disrespectful is the wrong word. It has to be challenging. So your characters have to be complex. They have to show complex behaviour in order for us to take that journey with them. And the stakes must be high. So the research was great, but I had to leave it behind and really sit in a trench with these 5 men who were getting on each other's nerves and who were trying to survive, and understand why they were there and why they chose to fight in this conflict where, ultimately they were forgotten and not respected.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the story this week about a lot of the Black and Asian soldiers who fought in, was it World War II, and hadn't had a marked grave, whereas everyone else got an individual tombstone.
That's right. It was for both wars, and particularly during the First World War, the authorities felt that gravestones were wasted on semi-savages. This was the language being used, and that it wasn't worth remembering them because they wouldn't be able to appreciate being memorialised. Which is one of the reasons why I wrote this particular play quite a while ago. But it's disgusting, It makes me very angry, and I did write the play from a point of view of rage.
And it's interesting as well because it's a topic that, as you said, it ignited some sort of rage within you, and it's something that I'm sure you must have felt at the time that more people need to know about this. And sometimes I have ideas like that as well, where it will come from me finding something that feels like it's an injustice and it's an issue that I want more people to know about. But at the same time, there's lots of debates at the moment about whether we see too much Black trauma depicted on stage/screen. And I'm sort of wrestling with how to balance this and how to make work that is politically engaged and that does raise awareness and that does allow people to have a conversation and allow people to feel seen, but also not traumatize an audience and not traumatize myself. So how do you balance that?
It's a fantastic question, and my approach is a 360-degree angle. So if I'm writing about history, I'm writing about British history. And, I like to show how events intersect with, the white community and the Black community. I am not a big fan of, Black trauma plays because people, a lot of plays were commissioned about, as an easy example, knife crime. We're just looking at one section of British society where, all of the characters are victims of said crime. I'm currently writing a piece about Black Lives Matter and criminal justice. And I insisted that, because I interviewed a lot of young Black people who've been caught at the sharp end of sentencing, who are sentenced first time, whereas white counterparts might be, given a suspended sentence by magistrates. Young Black kids are finding themselves behind bars for, minor crimes. And, to approach this subject, I insisted that I talk to prison officers, white and Black police officers. I interviewed Leroy Logan to get his perspective of having been a policeman and how he felt that intersected with the white community that he was policing. And what we discussed was the fact that the pushback is the idea that Black people can police white people. So if you're going to do a subject like that, you have to do it from both angles. So my plays are multicultural plays. So for example, with the Whip, a lot of people thought that was a play that was just about the slave trade, and it was dismissed as a play as just about the slave trade. And I thought, okay, I'll just wait for opening night for people to come along and to actually learn that this is about British history. You say that you find these stories, and you're not interested in just looking at them as black trauma. Turn them on their heads. Look at it from every perspective. I write all kinds of characters, black and white characters, and I'm very proud of my ability to do that. So the whip was seen from a very parliamentary point of view, and I was writing the kinds of histories and debate that are normally the preserve of white playwrights. And people have I think people sometimes feel challenged by that. I think we need to challenge ourselves as black writers and therefore challenge an audience when we're writing.
I see a play like The Whip as being an antidote to the revisionist history that we learn at school in this country. I just wanted to ask, before I do hand over to Suba, just if you have just more about your career as a writer, and particularly because you started your career as a journalist first. And I see lots of opportunities out there for new and emerging writers, but they're often capped at the age of 26 or the age of 30. So it's quite hard. I would say it's harder to come into writing after having perhaps done a different career or maybe had children at a younger age or anything it is that made you not have the opportunity to write when you were 18, 19, 20 years old. So I just wondered if you have any advice, if there are any emerging playwrights out there who want to get into it but might be above the age of, say, 30.
Again, I think that's a really good question because I started late, and I think I experienced pushback. I wasn't molded within a theatre community or a particular theatre building. I came as a fully fledged professional foreign affairs reporter and a black one. So, and that's unusual for people. So I kind of had to fight my way, stick to my guns about what I wanted to write about. I think, you have to go where the love is. You have to find people who are not afraid of the rubble of your imagination. Because even though I had a previous career, and journalism, I think, is again, runs parallel to theatre in terms of the power of its storytelling. So I understood story and structure in people's voices, but I had to learn as well. What I discovered was that as a emerging black writer who was coming to the industry later, I wasn't always afforded the space to learn, to fail, to make mistakes. You write a play that's not well received as an emerging writer, and people will let you know about it, and you don't always get that second opportunity. And I think that you just have to be resilient. My message, particularly to people coming out of this, the pandemic and lockdown, it's all about resilience and finding that community of creatives who are prepared to be open towards you and also not try to force you into a particular box as to the kind of black writer that they expect you to be. And that was my other battle, if you will. And I am unashamed in, being determined to be Juliet, who I am, and to not be compared to other black writers. We all come with enormous experience from all kinds of different angles, and it's just a matter of finding those people who are not afraid of your creative expression.
Wow, that's really great advice. Thank you. And now I'd like to bring Suba in to talk more about your career as a writer.
Hello there.
Hey, Suba.
And first and foremost, it's so wonderful to have you with us for this series, Juliet. Juliet was, in fact, the first playwright I met as artistic director at HighTide, which was glorious, I think, because of your relationship also with East of England, where we produce our annual Festival of Work, and what had sort of passed us by as a company previously was that we had this extraordinary Black British writer, but who is Suffolk born and bred.
What,
bred?
Yeah, right. I wasn't born in Suffolk. We moved to Suffolk. I was born in East London, Walthamstow, and we moved to Suffolk when I was 10 years old. We settled in a village. My mother was a teacher. She was the first black teacher in Suffolk County Council Education Authority, and it was quite a transition. I think for my brother and I, it was an interesting one, and we managed it because our parents really instilled in us such a sense of identity and love of our own cultural identity that it was unassailable. Because when we arrived in Suffolk, we were the only black family where we lived. Yeah, no, it was an interesting transition, and but I've grown a lot from it, and I'm very close to and appreciate both East London and Suffolk.
Just what captures me immediately there is something that you've mentioned about this idea of lost history, because actually it is surprising to us to imagine that non-white people just right now are growing up in rural communities, in non-urban contexts. That was my own journey. I grew up in a small village in the northeast, and the representation we see of cultural diversity sort of in mainstream media or what have you is that there isn't that tradition.
I completely agree with that, and that's why I want to tell stories, and I want to use the stage as a crucible for that kind of debate, because my experience and what I know to be true is not reflected in the kinds of stories that we see commissioned, particularly in TV drama. And the idea that particularly black communities were only prevalent in this country from the arrival of Windrush in the ship in 1948 is an absolute nonsense.
I just wondered, it's also reminded me of Ishii Din's work with this World War I play that I worked on, Wipers, which is, he knew the context, and he wanted to tell the story of the first Indian soldier that won a Victoria Cross. But what he chose to do was, so this chap was out there manning his machine gun post, and he instead told a story about 4 entirely invented characters who were stuck in a barn waiting for him to come back, because that gave him safety. It gave him liberation, I think, from some of the responsibilities of thinking about, well, these are real people, and how do I, if there is such potentially limited information, how do I make them three-dimensional without sort of imposing? And I wondered if that experience reflects anything that you've looked at in any of your work.
I guess so. One of my favourite quotes is, when journalism is silenced, literature must speak. And it is this idea about finding those truthful moments where your characters can be themselves, and without that fear of having to ennoble them in a way that is emotionally untruthful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think this touches on another play that I helped make about a vigilante freedom fighter in India, a woman who fights for women's rights. and she's a real person. I went to go and live with her, and she's extraordinary. But the fear and anxiety for the playwright was, this woman is doing such incredible work. How can I represent her three-dimensionally?
Yeah.
Because she's also a very flawed person. She's a human being, as we all are.
Yeah.
And having to really weigh up this idea of, well, what happens if we show her with her flaws and complexities? Does that give ammunition? Does that undermine the good that she's doing? And I think those considerations can be really paralyzing, actually, when you're tackling historical material.
I think I've learnt to get over it. I really struggled when I was writing At the Gates of Gaza. Then I realised that, no, I'm not writing a documentary. This is about human behaviour. And the way to bring your audience in is to allow them to see that and take that journey, with all the flaws that these characters might have, because they're human. It's this, what I call Sidney Poitier syndrome. He played these noble black men. And it was at a time when that was allowed, because, audiences felt safe with that nobility. It was not challenging. And often these characters would just reflect the kind of aspirations they had about racial justice. So, for example, how To Sir with Love was it was very different from the book by E.R. Braithwaite. And a lot of the challenges that the black school teacher faced, and a lot of the racism was removed. And then we look at Spike Lee's Malcolm X, and he showed him in all of his glory, so that we could understand the man who became this almost prophet-like vessel of wisdom. He came from a really belligerent and difficult past, and they showed that, and an audience wouldn't be able to understand or appreciate that journey without that spectrum. It is like singing the scales or playing the scales, if you like. We have to move up and down through notes. Human nature and human behaviour isn't one note. So it's powerful. It's so important to be able to look at ourselves in all of our glory, if you like, and not just from a perspective of nobility.
When I was at university, I read Toni Morrison's essay Playing in the Dark, which talks about the challenge that I think you're describing needing to transcend, which is in this Western culture, etc., as soon as you say black person, black character, a load of signifiers come into play, and the black character on stage is seen as representing the entirety of blackness in a way that perhaps a white character isn't. Therefore, white characters in literature have traditionally had the ability to be incredibly flawed. I mean, King Lear isn't going to win Father of the Year awards, but that doesn't seem to contravene or contradict their status as heroic characters, because they are understood in their complexity and in that vibrancy and with that range. And I feel like certainly in British theatre making, we are only slowly now even arriving at the point where that complexity can be offered to black characters, to female protagonists in plays who so often are kind of reduced to certain stereotypes. And I think that's part of the battle to fight, which I think a challenge for the writer in that space, where we're representing stories that are unheard or have been underserved, is having the confidence to allow some of that truth to be ugly.
Yes.
And feel like that isn't going to be used as ammunition, that's going to kind of demolish the cause in a way.
Yes. So what I really enjoyed when I wrote The Whip was the behaviour of those characters and how flawed they are while they're fighting for something that's so important. And Mercy had essentially abandoned her own children and left them with cruel masters because she felt that her own freedom was more important. Her ability to fight for freedom was more important than motherhood. I mean, Boyd is incredibly flawed. On the one hand, there he is apparently believing in abolition and racial justice. And, he's got this young former black slave who he's raising like a son, but not giving him any freedom. So it's really, and there's a lot of, there's misogyny, there's a lot of selfishness, there's a lot of political ambition, but the drive and the goal is to create something that's bigger than each of the characters, and in a sense they all know that.
And I think that's the thing to sort of push out to our listeners there as well, which is to really, even where it's uncomfortable, embrace that three-dimensionality of the characters you're creating, because their greatest success will be if they feel true for an audience, if they feel like human beings in the world, and confidence is required to go on that journey, I think, at times, but it's so important to hold fast to that. So on the subject of messy, flawed, three-dimensional human beings who have to be allowed to be terrible at times, I'm now going to introduce HighTide's associate artist, Chris Sonnex. I hope you enjoyed that handover, Chris.
That was phenomenal. Thank you, Suba. Juliet, hey, how you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I've got to admit, I've just been sitting here fanboying over you. Like, I just could listen to you for like hours on end. It was like, it was just brilliant. Thank you for being part of this.
It's just a wonderful opportunity to talk with creatives. This is life-giving, I think. We've all been through quite an experience, and it's still ongoing.
Just drifting away in all of your brilliant articulateness and elegance and just knowledge and artistry. And I was thinking about your talking about being the accessibility to theatre, and for me it was like when I was young and as I was getting into my 20s as well, I felt theatre not being particularly accessible. It wasn't something that sort of spoke. I was in it, I was doing it, I could make it, I was studying it, but it never really felt like I was welcome to come into the playhouses a bit. So accessing that art was difficult for me. But what wasn't difficult was music, and sort of getting a link into listening to the world through these incredible artists, really. And I thought, I just had a moment there of thinking, I think it's probably very trite, like comparison, but musicians and those real seminal albums being like journalism for the times, regardless of if it's Nina Simone or if it's Fela Kuti or Dizzy Rascal, they're sort of talking of a time and a place, and they can really tell you about that. So I wondered whether music had any influence on your artistry, and if so, who was it?
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm influenced by quite a few artists, and my tastes is quite eclectic. So I've grown up around a lot of Cuban music and a lot of calypso music as well. There is one album that I think really spoke to me, actually, and that's Island Life by Grace Jones. Before Beyonce, Lady Gaga, we had Grace Jones, and as a young black girl, watching this uncompromising, black woman with her flat top, and her artistry. I mean, she was creating music videos. She's all about, she performs her music. She is one with her identity, how she expresses herself. I just couldn't take my eyes off of her. And I love the fact that there's no one else like her.
Mm.
I think it was about 3 years ago, she performed at quite a few music festivals with a hula hoop. I mean, she's in her late 60s. Absolutely amazing. I'm trying to remember which song it was. I mean, it was...
Slave to the Rhythm.
Thank you.
I have seen Grace Jones hula hoop several times for that full year.
Well, I bought a hula hoop. And, still struggling to get it up. And there she was. This is a long song. In her high heels, her corset, she had these Buddhist bells, doing hula hooping to Slave to the Rhythm. And that song is so important. But I think for me, it's a song I play a lot because, through my career, I've often felt as if people have tried to force me into a box. Mm. And I'm always trying to get out of said box. So, for example, when I joined the BBC, people just wanted me to go and, cover the Notting Hill Carnival, and I wanted to go to Belfast. I had to fight to get to Belfast. Yeah. I had to fight to get into and report from refugee camps because people had a very narrow view as to, what a young black reporter would be interested in. Always wanted to tell the international stories. And Slave to the Rhythm, speaks about someone who wants to break out of whatever rhythm and, popular beliefs there are at the time. So, yeah, definitely Grace Jones, Island Life.
That's amazing, isn't it? Because Grace Jones as an entity is doing exactly that. Singer, songwriter, lyricist, but like also model, also actress, also record producer, not fitting into any one thing, of not really, and some might say even like a performing artist, I guess, and performance artist, and even those genres, it's like R&B, disco, new wave, art, it's all over the place, and that, like, I love that about artists of really going, I'm not going to be that one thing, and I think that it's quite clear, isn't it, from even from your career trajectory, I think, isn't it?
Well, I've tried to be inspired by someone like her, who, it's easy to become institutionalised. I mean, I was at the Bee for a little while, and one of the reasons why I decided to leave was that I just thought, I can't live like this. It provides this extraordinary security. But when you get to work and you pop to the ladies' loo and you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're not sure who's looking back at you, because you feel that you have to fit in with certain norms and editorial ideas. I just thought, no, this isn't, for me. And then you look at someone like Grace Jones or Bjork even. I'm a big fan of Bjork. Not particularly aware of what she might be doing now, but I remember when she came out, it was like, oh my God, this Icelandic performer just doing her thing. So sometimes when I'm writing, and depending on what I'm trying to write, I will listen to music to kind of get me there. Last year there was so much gloom. When we went into lockdown, it was weird. I mean, on the one hand, I really liked the bird song, and I liked the fact that I couldn't hear the double-decker buses, and the cars driving by. But I did rely on music to kind of get me going again. Mm. I had to kind of create playlists, and it's impossible to listen to music and not have it affect every being of your fibre, or fibre of your being rather, and to move and to have a bit of a dance as well, you know.
Yeah, it's really funny actually. I was just in rehearsals today, and the cast were on a bit of a low moment, and so we sort of started the day with dancing to Toots and the Maytals, and it just immediately changed everybody's mood.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
and just to see the power of art, just literally being manifested in it's not even that a long song, it's sort of 3 minutes, you know, and just that changing the mood of everybody, and then that continually pushing the artist to continue to start making stuff. And I think it's really, really important. One of the reasons I love this question actually is that it just gives me music to listen to. Yes,
they're fantastic. And Island Life, Grace Jones, as I said, precursor to Beyonce and Lady Gaga and everyone who comes after, you know, just such a trailblazer. And we need that spirit right now, you know.
Oh, well, 100%. And also the spirit of saying, you can't pin me down, you can't take what you think you know of me and put me in this box. And I think the artists that will hopefully be able to rebel against all of those boxes, like yourself and Grace Jones, will just get better and better artists, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah. And she's still performing, doing her hula hoop. So let's hope that we get an opportunity to see her live somewhere.
If we went viral, we could get Grace Jones to send you a hula hoop.
Oh my gosh.
Can we do a viral campaign?
That would be amazing. That would be absolutely amazing. I'd then have to put it online, I guess, the results of my effort. But yeah, it'd be worth it.
Or even maybe that's the next play, Grace Jones's Hula Hoop. I feel like that is a good title for a play.
Grace Jones's Hula Hoop.
I will finish the podcast, Juliet, with asking you this question, and it's really simple. It's basically, what would you have told your baby self just when you were having the seeds of the idea that you might want to actually do writing full time, or that you wanted to go into this industry? What would you have told yourself?
That's a superb question. To be true to myself, to not doubt my own creative voice. And, you know, as I said earlier, I mean, that is a journey in itself. I think we do start out with a lot of doubt. But, you know, it's so important that, and you know, for our own mental health, to be honest, our own self-image, our own ability to be comfortable with who we are and our own voice is really important, and particularly for young people right now. That's what I would tell my baby self. I think I've, you know, and we have our ups and downs, and, you know, I think I found myself. Sometimes you lose yourself. It's like being on a shore and watching a ship sail out to sea, and you lose it on the horizon and then you wait for it to return. I think that's what our kind of like inner identity can be like sometimes.
Yeah.
And also to be comfortable when it sails away and know that it will come back.
That's so important, isn't it? Thank you. I spend spending a significant amount of time with young people at the moment, and consistently saying that same thing. And I think coming from your voice and coming from a person like you, with all of the work that you've done and all of the brilliance that you've just spoken on this podcast, I think it means just so much more. So thank you for saying that and giving people agency to believe that.
Thank you.
This podcast was produced by HighTide and supported by Nick Hern Books and Lansons. It was made possible with support from the Culture Recovery Fund. It was presented and produced by myself, Naomi Soneye-Thomas, and co-presented by Chris Sonnex and Suba. Chris Sonnex also worked as a co-creator on the podcast. It was recorded by Callum Swingler and edited by Liam Cameron, and featured original artwork by Dragonfly Design. Links to references and resources discussed in this episode can also be found at www.hightide.org.uk, where you can also subscribe to HighTide's newsletter and donate to the theatre company. If you'd like to follow HighTide on Twitter, their handle is @_HighTide_. And don't forget, if you'd like to join in with the discussion in today's episode, you can do so on social media using the hashtag School of HighTide.